One of the positives that will come out of this challenging period is, I think, a broader willingness to experiment with new technologies in class. And that's certainly a good thing.
Today on LawNext, Legal Education in a Lockdown, I speak with Jennifer Mnookin, Dean of the UCLA School of Law. This is Bob Ambrogi, and you're listening to LawNext, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. Dean Mnookin, welcome to LawNext.
Thanks so much, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here.
We'll get to today's interview in just a moment. But first, let's hear from the sponsors who generously support LawNext. And now, on to this week's interview. And first off, just how are you doing during this unprecedented time?
Well, it has been quite a month and a half. It's definitely not what any of us were expecting when this school year began, or even when this semester began. Today is actually the last day of classes at UCLA School of Law, and I think we are all breathing a collective sigh of relief that we've gotten through the semester, and that though it's been challenging, here we are. And in some ways, it's gone better than we might have feared.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I was looking at your academic calendar and noticing that, as you say, today is the last formal day of classes. I wonder if you could contrast for me what it feels like from where you sit from, the last day of classes last year and where you find yourself this year.
It's a great question. I mean, in some ways, it feels so different, and it's been unprecedented. On the other hand, I think our first years are feeling proud of themselves, a little nervous about finals, even though they're pass-fail, and facing, obviously, a great deal more uncertainty than they expected. That's even truer of our third years. They are looking at commencement in just a few weeks, but commencement will be virtual. We will plan a time to gather in person later, but we don't know when, we don't know where. They are getting ready to study for a bar exam this summer, but they don't know whether it will really happen on the dates that, say, California has announced. Just yesterday, California announced a delayed bar. And their employment situation looks a good deal less certain than it did just a few months ago. At the same time, the flow of the academic year continues, the learning continues, and the connection to one another continues. So much is different, but much is not.
Well, you touched on a lot of things that I'd like to explore in a little bit more depth, but let's start with this latest bit of news that as we record this on April 28th, the Supreme Court of California just yesterday announced its decision to postpone the bar exam to September, and added that the bar should make every effort possible to administer the exam online with remote and or electronic proctoring. I'm in Massachusetts, which also has committed to, also delayed the test to September and committed to an online test. Now, I know that you and Erwin Chemerinsky, the dean of UC Berkeley Law School, recently wrote an op-ed in the National Law Journal calling on states to give graduating law students 2-year provisional licenses to practice law. So are you satisfied with what the Supreme Court of California has done as an alternative to provisional licensing?
Candidly, I'm not, because I'm not sure it's realistic. If we had a great deal of confidence that the bar exam could be given online in a secure manner in early September, I think that's not an optimal or ideal solution for our recent graduates. But in this pandemic, and given everything, it would seem to me to be, an acceptable approach. Not ideal, but acceptable, all things considered. The challenge is, at this point, I don't think there's any reason to have a great deal of confidence that a secure online bar exam can be developed and administered by early September. The NCBE has told the deans that they're not sure that's realistic. The bar exam, it's a very high stakes exam. How do we do remote proctoring? How do we deal with technology? I mean, I look at how we've been running, law schools via Zoom, and in many ways it's worked, but the glitches have been substantial too. And to go into an online bar exam that fast, if there's a real roadmap and game plan, we deans certainly haven't seen that yet. And that's very worrying because, students our recent graduates need to put enormous amounts of time into studying for this, high stakes, if not that well-designed exam. And the idea that they would do that and then have it not work or not be able to be offered after all. They've been through a lot this semester. That doesn't seem like a sensible plan for launching their legal careers.
Yeah. I mean, I assume that the Supreme Court of California and the SJC here in Massachusetts must have at least consulted with the NCBE, and certainly I know that they solicited input from the deans, and I don't know if you were one of those who provided input, but do you think it is feasible to be able to deliver the exam online? What are the biggest challenges? Is it the proctoring part of it, the security part of it? What most concerns you? Yeah.
I think the proctoring and the security part's very, very real. This is an extremely high stakes exam that thousands of people will be taking that launches their career. And in California, because of the extremely elevated cut score that California chooses to have, California also has a lower pass rate than most other states. And so, the security issues are very substantial. I also, think if you're looking at remote proctoring, it means you need the bandwidth to be doing that. So students have to be online for the entire duration of their exam. What if their Wi-Fi connection glitches? Yeah. What if there's some other problem? It's one thing to do, remote GREs from a center that's designed for that or devoted to that. This is a really different enterprise. And I don't want to sound like, if they could figure all of this out, that would be exciting. Yeah. But it sure seems risky. And plan Bs, to go to a plan B, especially without a lot of notice, would have enormous cost. Yeah. So would it if they tried and then found out it didn't work. Then what?
Yeah.
So I think provisional licensing with then even potentially some pathway to permanent licensure that might or might not go through the bar exam would be a much more secure way to go.
Yeah. So what would that look like in your mind?
If I could design such a scheme, which I most certainly cannot, I don't have that power or authority. I would let recent graduates, I would let those who have already signed up to take the exam get a provisional license that would require them to have some modest to moderate appropriate degree of supervision, so that these young lawyers could not go out and just hang their shingle out, right? They have to work with other licensed lawyers. But I would give them a fair degree of ability to actually lawyer under supervision, right? So that they can begin their careers. And then I'd give them a reasonable period of time, probably something like 2 years, in order to develop their license. One of the problems with a short leash provisional licensing scheme is that if everybody's got to go take the bar exam in February, it leads employers either to say, you know what, just don't even start work till after you've taken the February bar, or it forces students or recent graduates to take time off to study when they've barely begun. So I'd give them a good deal more flexibility about when they go sit for the bar exam, whether it's the next time it's offered or whether they wait a little longer until they're at a place where they've developed their professional. They've been in the workplace a little bit longer and can make that choice. If it were really up to me, I would also probably look at alternative pathways to licensure that maybe didn't have to go through the bar exam. If you'd really been working for 18 months and shown your competency, maybe there's ways that you could do a great number of pro bono hours and some CLEs and some other more limited tests to establish your competence. But I recognize that states might not go for that. And even if they want to sort of stick to the traditional bar exam, if you gave students and recent graduates 2 years to do that, I think you could at least give them some control and some agency over the shape of their professional beginnings.
I wonder, would you be saying that even if we were not in this crisis? In other words, do you feel that the bar exam may not still be the right way or the best way to determine someone's readiness to practice law?
So I do think that we should reform the bar exam. I think that it's not a very accurate match for the competence that young lawyers need. I think it remains quite memory intensive in an era of Westlaw, Lexis, Google. When the bar exam was designed, we didn't all have computers in our hands in the form of our iPhones or Android devices or whatnot. I guess I think the performance test part of the bar exam is probably the part that draws most explicitly upon the kinds of skills that young lawyers really do need to have. But I am a fan of bar reform, and I think that would be an extremely good thing for us to be looking at more generally. Maybe this crisis and the challenges over the bar exam create a window for accelerating that process of change. But I'm not all in on just diploma license across the country. I do recognize the need for some kind of way of establishing, competence and readiness to practice law. I mean, it works in Wisconsin, and now Utah has just gone forward with a provisional plan, at least for diploma license, right. But it's only made it available to schools that have a quite high pass rate
right.
On the bar.
Right. I mean, it seems to make so much sense in a time when people are predicting there's going to be a tidal wave of legal problems and coming out of this crisis, and to have a new crop of provisionally licensed lawyers could be a really critical way of addressing some of the needs that are going to come out of this.
That's right. It would put them in a position to be able to help and to be able to begin their careers after the 3 years they've spent investing in their education. And it would also give them certainty and confidence about a path forward. I think part of what really disappoints me about what we've just seen in California and in other states, I know Massachusetts has said they'll try to do online as well, is that Massachusetts did a little bit better on this than California, but they haven't provided clear alternative pathways or timelines or how they'll determine whether they're confident this could really work and go forward. So, normally students graduate, and what they begin to do just pretty immediately is start studying for the bar. And this year, do they do that? Do they spend their summer studying for a September bar exam? If they do that and it doesn't end up happening, that will have been another disappointment for a group that, certainly faced a conclusion of law school that was not what they expected. And even more importantly, it then leaves them in limbo, and it leaves their employers in limbo about what comes next. That just does not seem like a good place to be.
We'll get back to my interview in just a moment. But first, let's take a break to hear from the sponsors who generously support LawNext. And now, let's continue this week's interview. Dean Mnookin, I wanted to turn to what's happening with your school and wondering at what point it was that you decided that you had to shut down your school, and how did you go about making and implementing that decision?
It's funny. It was just about 6 or 7 weeks ago, but it also feels almost like a world away. The UCLA as an entire university made the decision March 10th to go online March 11th. So we had less than 24 hours from that decision to implementation. Now, to be fair, for the previous few days, I and we saw that this was likely coming, and we'd given our community notice that this was likely coming. But the decision was made one day, and it was put into effect the next. And the astonishing thing is that it went more smoothly than we ever would have imagined. I mean, I don't want to say that there weren't challenges, but most of our faculty took a deep breath, and whether or not they'd ever been on Zoom or thought about giving a class remotely, they jumped in and did their best. I was kind of amazed and really impressed. I was incredibly impressed that our students too took a deep breath and recognized that we didn't have a lot of choice about this and continued with their learning. So it was sudden. It was not perfect. I'm not going to say that you want to look at all those early recordings of classes and, as faculty, we're figuring out how to use the raise hand function and how to use breakout rooms and what to do when their internet went out. But the fundamental enterprise of learning, talking, engaging with one another, thinking deeply, all continued.
Yeah, it's interesting. I happened to be at BYU Law School in Provo, Utah, on the very days you're talking about. The day that they decided, I happened to be there for another meeting, but on the day that they decided to shut down, I just happened to be there, and so I got to see firsthand a little bit of the back end of what was going on there, and it did seem that one of the most immediate concerns was whether some of the more experienced professors would be able to teach via Zoom, but it seems to have worked out.
It really has. I mean, I think it's been. One of the positives that will come out of this challenging period is, I think, a broader willingness to experiment with new technologies in class, and that's certainly a good thing. I mean, certainly at UCLA, we have some faculty who are doing that. I believe, technologies in the classroom are kind of a tool, not a substitute. But I do think that there's going to be ways that more faculty play with technology and take opportunities for collaboration and collaborative learning as a result of what's happened over the last 6 weeks.
And you yourself have been teaching an online course, as I understand it. How has that experience been for you?
It's true. I've been teaching a class in our first-year elective program. We call them Modes of Legal Inquiry. They're classes that give students the chance to step outside the traditional first-year curriculum and to take an elective in something where they also read. Most of the materials are not cases, not appellate cases, but rather come from other kinds of scholarship. And so I've been teaching a class that's an introduction to wrongful convictions. And I will say my first remote class was it was okay, but I too needed to get more practice with the technology and learn how to communicate effectively with the students and how to create a conversation when they aren't sitting around a seminar table. But I'm grateful that I'm a lot more Zoom proficient than I was in early March, and
as are we all.
Exactly, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah,
I think that's a good thing.
What if anything is lost for law students in a virtual only classroom environment?
I think that a number of things are lost. I am not in the camp that thinks that this is equivalent. I think that the back and forth among classmates is harder to curate. You can't see as much people's facial expressions or how they're engaging. And so people can raise their hand and or jump in, but you can't get quite the same flow that you can in a traditional Socratic classroom. You can't walk outside of class afterwards and keep the conversation going with somebody that you heard from in class. Some of our students were having bandwidth issues if they kept their video live. And so you're often teaching to a mixture of still photos and videos, and that's certainly not as effective as an in-person classroom. I think what's also lost is all of the co-curricular engagements. At UCLA, as at many schools, students can attend a lunch talk literally every single day, usually. And all of that and all of the student org energy and activity, even though we are doing some virtual equivalents, it doesn't have the bustle and the energy and the informal connections that enrich learning very dramatically.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a loss.
Yeah. And what happens to schools such as yours, the clinical program? I'm sure you have any number of clinical programs. What happens to the students who participated in those and the clients that those programs assisted?
Well, we've kept them going to the best of our ability. And that means different things in different clinics. In our simulation classes, trial ad can be done via Zoom. It may not be quite the same, but that's not so tough. But when you have live clients and real clients, it depends. Some of those clients have access to technology, some less so. And so each of our clinics has had to find ways to continue their projects and keep things going. And they have. I mean, our immigration clinic had an asylum win in the midst of COVID. And so that was exciting. Our Vets Justice Clinic continues. Our policy clinics have probably a little bit of an easier time than our clinics that have direct services, especially for vulnerable populations. But, our immigration clinic had flyers up in a space that was giving out meals and foods at the school at which it's based, and did a call about employment issues for families who could phone in and, get some updates and some learning on employment in the time of COVID, right? So the work does continue, but obviously, again, it can't be the same. And especially for clinics working with vulnerable populations that may not have technology access, it makes it all one step harder and harder to build trust and relationships with clients too.
Yeah. We talked about graduating students and options or lack of options for getting admitted to practice. What about other students who had summer internships planned or who are working on, career planning, career services? How does this impact them?
It's a challenge. So a number of large law firms have committed that they will continue their summer programs, even if remote. Some of them have shortened them or are making other changes. Others haven't made decisions yet, but have said that students can expect permanent offers no matter what happens with the summer program. And some have committed to continue paying the students regardless of whether they're able to work remotely. But some have canceled. Some firms have just said, we can't make a go of this, and we're facing our own financial challenges. And so there are some students who have lost their summer jobs. And the same is true on the public interest side. There are a number of public interest employers who are committed to going forward remotely, but there's some who just don't feel like they've got the bandwidth, both maybe technological, but also, metaphorical. And so there are students who are still looking. We at UCLA have made a commitment that we are prepared to help every student find some summer opportunity. And so we have been looking around the law school and UCLA as a whole to broaden the range of opportunities that we can offer. We've, our clinics, for example, faculty members who have projects. We're expanding the availability of all of those things to our students because we are committed to making sure that every student who wants one can have a summer experience. And we will fund every student who's having a summer experience, not at the level that a law firm does,
right.
But we will make that available to every one of our students. I'm still figuring out how many that's going to be. And again, that's another form of uncertainty that's challenging.
Yeah. So much uncertainty.
That's right.
And when summer ends, what happens then? What have you made plans yet?
Bob, that's the $64,000 question at this point. And that's part of what's very challenging about all of this. If it's the same for our recent graduates, right? I mean, if they knew that they could really take the bar in September, that's disappointing when they were planning on July, but they'd make it work. And the same goes for law schools as a whole. If we could know how long this was going to last, we could plan for it. But right now, it feels like we're contingency planning in about 6 different directions. Yeah. There was a piece recently in Inside Higher Ed talking about 15 scenarios for the fall, right? and it's hard to plan effectively when you're planning multiply. I guess what I would say, my own view right now, is that there is no way that this next fall looks like last fall. I think that at least for a population that may be immunocompromised or otherwise at risk, we have to make sure that there are safe ways forward for them to teach and to learn. The question is whether it's going to be safe and plausible to do something hybrid, right? Where we can bring back some portions of in-person learning. But I don't think we'll be in a place where we can have conferences and hold events and have 80-person classes in the same space that we had them in last fall. That just doesn't seem, I guess about 1,000 things would have to go right in order for that to happen.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem like a realistic thing to plan for.
Yeah. It seems like that would be most difficult for the incoming 1Ls.
That's right. I mean, I hope, my own view is that it's our responsibility to try to find a pathway for some in-person learning. If public health constraints turn out to make that impossible and we just can't do it, we'll of course have to live with that and move forward. But I don't want to make that decision too quickly, given how fast moving all of this is. What if a really effective treatment did emerge? That would change the landscape. Yeah. And we don't want to plan in a way that doesn't create some opportunities for in-person learning if we can do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think even if we have to be entirely remote, we can provide, a strong education and a valuable community. But I do think that I would rather that our first-year law students in particular had some opportunities to have the in-person experience that is kind of a hallmark.
Yeah. How did the various contingencies impact the finances of the law school or of higher education institutions in general?
Well, that's a big issue right
that's
now.
Another big question.
You've been seeing, no doubt, the stories all across the country of challenge in this regard, and there's been a lot of universities that have, given a great deal of detail on this. I just saw the Johns Hopkins president, for example, issued a very detailed statement that I think is worth everybody reading, that kind of goes through the expected costs and challenges as just one example. And the UC system has lost hundreds of millions of dollars already as a result of COVID, at a system-wide level. And certainly UCLA faces fiscal challenges too. I would say the two biggest areas of fiscal challenge and risk for the university as a whole are auxiliaries, dorms, food, tickets, all of that, and also the health system risk for those systems with health systems. Those are obviously not law school specific risks, but we're part of a whole university. And so those challenges affect us as well. For us, probably the one of the biggest challenges is the international students, both international JDs, of whom we have a handful, not a great many, but also our LLM program, which is a really core part of UCLA Law School. And it's mostly international students, some domestic students, but it seems very unlikely at this point that it is realistic for LLM students to get visas to come to the U.S. to begin a course of study in early to mid-August. Yeah. So we're looking at the options that include a potential January start date for our LLMs and a variety of other alternatives. But that seems like the hardest nut to crack in terms of, even if everything went just right, that seems unlikely to happen in its normal form.
Yeah. Do you need to look at tuitions if you're going to a virtual only law school?
I'm part of a very large system. So that's not at all in my direct control. I guess I think, though, the answer is going to be probably not. And I think that's going to be true for a couple of reasons. I think, first of all, we'll, of course, be aiming to be back in person as fast and as soon as we can. And the second is that, we're still going to be doing everything in our power to provide a top-notch education. I don't want to say it's the same or that there isn't some loss, but fundamentally, I do think that students will have to decide what they want, and certainly I understand that there may be some incoming first years who do make the decision to delay law school if they're going to begin it online, and I would understand that decision. On the other hand, looking at what's going on in the world right now, if your choice is law school, but it's going to be remote, or being at home and maybe not having employment options, it might be a great time to start law school.
Yeah. In other areas of law, some people are seeing potential silver linings in that this crisis could potentially drive innovation in law practice, innovation in court systems. Are you seeing any silver linings here for law schools and legal education?
I think there are some silver linings, although I want to be clear that this is a pandemic and it's deeply unfortunate. So I mean, it's great if we can find some silver linings, but I wish we could have learned these lessons without these costs.
Absolutely, I agree.
I do think there are some things we've learned, though. I mean, so we've done all of our admissions processes virtually, and that went better than we would have expected. And I think what it showed us is that there's more room for more virtual pieces in the admissions and recruiting cycle than we would have known before. We did some forms of small group sessions with faculty, for example, that went beyond what we've typically done. And Zoom worked great for that. We should make that a piece of what we do every year, even when we're also able to gather in person. And I think that's true more. I guess I'd say that there's two additional ways where there's pretty clear silver linings that I can already see. One is that the legal academy as a whole has just gotten a crash course in remote collaboration, and that's going to have payoffs. So, I'm seeing it both in some work that some of my colleagues are doing. My colleague Sharon Dolovich has begun a COVID behind bars project where she's tracing everything that we can know about the number of cases in federal and state prisons, about who's getting released, what's going on. And she's created a big set of databases, and she's collaborating with both students remotely and colleagues all across the country. And it's not that there weren't examples of that before, but it's just all accelerated. Everybody's developed the know-how to participate in those kinds of remote collaborations. And so I think we'll be likely to see perhaps some classes that cross institution and some learning opportunities that do happen partly via Zoom, and some faculty collaborations that don't require getting on airplanes. And I think that's going to be a really positive thing. I think the second real silver lining around the technology is that people are going to be less afraid of it, and they're going to be more thoughtful and more willing to incorporate legal tech into their ordinary ways of doing business. And I think that's a good thing, because law schools in general have been a little slow on the innovation curve.
Recognizing that few of us could have ever anticipated what we're finding ourselves in here, do you think that this experience has exposed any kind of fundamental weaknesses in the law school education system or the legal education system?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think that for universities as a whole, this isn't a law school point, it's a whole university point. It does suggest some fragilities that we perhaps weren't fully aware of. I mean, in all of my years in legal education and in my 5 years as dean, pandemic planning wasn't on anyone's radar, right? I mean, something that would force this degree of change this quickly just wasn't in our risk planning, our thinking about the institution. And, that's true, even though there was SARS and even though there was, Ebola, so it does make me wonder what other risks to our learning are out there that we just haven't even focused on or thought about.
Yeah.
And this much disruption this quickly, it's not something we were prepared for. I do think that at UCLA, but also across the legal academy and across universities, people have rolled up their sleeves and shown resilience and ability to make it work. But it did come a little bit out of nowhere. I mean, I think that's true across our economy. I don't want to single out education in this way, but it is striking how unprepared we were. And I guess the other interesting question is it does force us to ask what parts of our education are most central, and how could we begin to think about, curricular reform or design reform coming out of this. I hope we create spaces for those conversations, and that we don't just go back entirely to the before time, but that we engage in strategic conversations and hard conversations about what we've learned.
Dean, do you think there's anything that you learned on a personal level with regard to your role as dean that will may in any way alter or influence how you do your job going forward?
Yes, I do. I mean, for one thing, I've learned that I really do like in-person meetings better than Zoom, right? I'm grateful for Zoom. I'm really grateful that, not only can I help to run and lead a law school from my home office, but my staff can too. I mean, the extent to which people have been able to get their work done and continue to think creatively, often in tough circumstances with young children who may not be in school and or doing Zoom school. It's been really kind of amazing and inspiring to see how much people are putting in and how much they're able to do. But at the same time, it is lonely, or it's lonelier. It's harder to just kind of have those check-ins and to communicate effectively with others. And communication is really central. Keeping people informed about what's going on. It can feel like a lot of people are spinning plates, and it can take extra work to make sure that they're effectively talking to each other and all on the same page. I think I have learned that trying to just stay on top of communication is really, really central. I knew that before, but this brings it to the fore in a really direct and important way.
Although it gets all the more difficult staying on top of it all, because it seems like the volume of communication has accelerated. But
yeah, no, that's right. The volume has accelerated, and I mean, part of what's happened is that you have all the crisis related dynamics, but all the regular stuff is still happening.
Yeah.
I mean, not the conferences and not the lunches, but admitting a class, figuring out financial aid, working hard to try to maintain employment strengths for our students and graduates, thinking about their professional development, communicating with alums. I mean, all of the normal parts of running a law school haven't disappeared. And that's true for my senior staff and managers too. I'm very lucky, and I've been really impressed with how much they've all brought to this. We keep reading about these people who are taking up, knitting and, their baking skills. And that's not my experience of this crisis. So,
not mine either. I've been peppering you with questions before we wrap up. Is there anything else that you'd like to say or close with before we finish?
I've been really impressed to see how a community can sustain itself and continue in a period of deeply unexpected crisis and some degree of anxiety and fear. We've certainly also seen inequality exposed a little bit more directly than perhaps what we see during our ordinary school year. We have students who are in very comfortable situations right now, and students who are in much more challenging situations, both financially and in terms of health and their families. And I hope that when we return to whatever the new normal becomes, we continue to think about ways of trying to address those issues, because they've been starkly apparent in this time. But that doesn't mean that they're not always true. And sometimes they don't get enough attention in the legal academy or in this profession.
Well, Dean, thank you very much for taking the time to share your thoughts and experiences with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me. Really appreciate that. It's been fun.
We've been speaking with Jennifer Mnookin, Dean of the UCLA School of Law. This is Bob Ambrogi. The show is produced by Populous Radio. Thanks for listening. Until next time.